Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Max Wesselcouch. I direct the Mullis Institute for Affordable Housing Policy at the NYU Furman Center. And I'm going to share some findings from our recent State of New York City's Housing and Neighborhoods report to hopefully add some citywide context to your discussions. So thank you to the board for inviting me here today.
Thank you to Harvey and Shayla for suggesting it.
And just everything that I'm presenting today is in our book, The State of New York City's Housing and Neighborhoods, which is available online. We're also happy to send hard copies to anyone who would like one. So in the report, we show that over the past 8 years, rent increases have far surpassed income growth. Between 2005 and 2013, the median rent jumped by nearly 12%, while the median income of renter households increased by only 2% as measured in real terms. And just to clarify, this is looking at all renters in the city, not just the stabilized renters. In 2013, about 54% of renter households were rent burdened, facing housing costs equal to at least 30% or more of their income. So for a household earning the median renter income of about $41,000 in 2013, that household would be able to afford an apartment renting for $1,036 or less if paying no less than 30% of their income on rent. We show that this share of households who are rent burdened has stopped increasing in recent years, but it's remained very high compared to historical levels. As recently as 2000, just 43% of renters were rent burdened. At every income level that we looked at, a larger share of renters were burdened in 2013 than they had been in 2000. However, not all households are equally likely to be rent burdened. In 2000, nearly 80% of very low income renters were rent burdened, with about 42% of households making between 30% and 50% of AMI being severely rent burdened or facing housing costs over 50% of their monthly income. In 2013, nearly 55% of renter households earning between 51% and 80% of AMI, which is roughly about $47,000 to $61,000 for a three-person household, were rent burdened, with nearly 10% facing a severe rent burden, again paying over 50% of their income on housing. There's considerable variation across neighborhoods in rent levels. One of the frustrating things when we look at census rent data is that it captures everyone together. So it's the market rate renters, the stabilized renters, renters in subsidized units or in public housing. So this year we also looked at the median asking rent by community district as reported by StreetEasy. And we found that the median asking rent of an apartment advertised for rent on StreetEasy in 2013 exceeded $3,000 in 8 neighborhoods, mostly in Manhattan. There certainly are neighborhoods in the city where rents are still more affordable, but as I'm about to show you, those neighborhoods lack some certain other opportunity measures. We know that neighborhood conditions affect residents. For example, research shows that exposure to crime can cause stress that results in poor health or well-being outcomes. New York City's serious crime rates have remained steady in recent years, following a dramatic decline over the past 2 decades. But that overall decline masks some neighborhood variation. In several neighborhoods, crime rates are more than double the citywide average, and these neighborhoods tend to be the ones where rent levels are lower. We see a similar trend when we look at the share of students performing at grade level in public schools. Again, in some of the lower cost neighborhoods, like in central Brooklyn, central Harlem, and the South Bronx, fewer than 1 in 5 students performed at grade level in math in 2014. Finally, the majority of New Yorkers rely on public transit to commute to work each day, and indeed public transportation can provide a lot of access to opportunities that might not exist in neighborhoods. However, again, in some of these lower cost neighborhoods, we see that residents have less access to transit and fewer of them are using public transit to commute. So thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
So I'm curious about the source of data, the Street Easy.
Yeah.
So I'm presuming that what Street Easy does is it would include legal rents, preferential rents, and market rents all together because it's what the landlords are asking for. Is that why you think it's a useful data source?
We think it's useful if we think about someone who's out on the market trying to find a new apartment, right? Because that's what they face. Is it could be any of these things. It could be a totally market rate, non-stabilized apartment. It could be a legal stabilized apartment, though they're not usually advertised that way. And it could be a preferential rent. I should say, we know that not every apartment that's available for rent is included in these figures. There are certainly some small landlords who might be putting signs in their windows, and there's just no way right now for us to capture that. But we think that this is at least a good indication of maybe the first step that someone might look at.
And obviously, it's possible that some of the rents being sought on Street Easy are actually in excess of the rent stabilized rent because this doesn't account for that. But it's an interesting source. Thanks for sharing it. Other questions?
Interesting. On the rent burden on the people at 30 to 50% of AMI, can you tell what the number of people we're talking about in that universe? And can you just, is there a way to look at them to be subsidized or not subsidized housing? Because I know you mentioned there are people in public housing or mental illness or that data, but how we can parse that out?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the new HVS isn't available yet, which will allow us to unpack a lot of that. I think like all of you, we're hoping that it arrives any day now. So this is using the National American Community Survey, which doesn't allow us to parse out those groups. We've done we tried to correct for some of that, not in this figure, just kind of behind the scenes, but we're not confident enough in it until the HVS.
Do you have overall numbers of people who fit those categories?
We do, yeah. I'd be happy to share that with the board.
I'm interested because we know the numbers of people who, let's say, live in public housing, and we know what incomes they're likely to be at, so we can parse out those numbers. We can actually think about what's left over.
Yep.
It's interesting for us to think of the average stabilized households making $40,000 a year, and so how much of them are really severely rent burdened in relationship to where they live, and then what the opportunities are, for income versus expenses, and that's part of what is our calculation.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share the raw numbers. I can send them, follow up with Andrew today.
Yeah, what's the echo?
The air fish?
Your feedback.
Oh, feedback?
Am I sitting too close to the mic?
And I noticed today Farm released another report about the increase in renters in 11 cities across the country, and New York being one of those cities becoming much more a renter city just because of the rent burden. Can you talk about what you found in New York in relationship to rent burden and renters in general?
Right. So we looked at the central cities of the next 10 largest MSAs, and New York has always had a high renter population, and we see that the renter population is growing in some other cities. And one common thread across the cities that we looked at is that low-income renters, a very high share of low-income renters are rent burdened, right? It's rents, as I quoted, the $1,036 a month is an affordable rent for the median renter in New York. And that's true, even in places like Washington, D.C., and Boston, and San Francisco, but even in Dallas and Houston, it's hard for low-income renters everywhere. Where New York stood out was when we looked at moderate income renters, so the middle class. In other cities, there are plenty of affordable rental units available for, two-income, entry-level household. In New York, we see a much higher rent burden, and that's reflected here in the moderate income category, where we see about 20% of moderate income renters, so between about 80 and 130% of AMI are rent burdened.
This may be a stretch, but has any study been done to compare New York to cities like London, Singapore, Hong Kong, and that? Because we're a global city and we're not Dallas any longer.
Yeah, so we haven't pursued that just because the differences in data make it really difficult.
Max, the numbers you're using are based on gross rent or contract rent when you do the
This is based on gross rent.
Gross rent.
Yeah, which is the HUD standard, is gross rent and gross income.
And I just want to highlight that you guys also do have a whole bunch of reports based on areas, and it breaks down like how many are rent stabilized and all of these other data by community districts,
Yeah,
which are super useful.
For each page, we break down the rental stock by community district and rent levels.
What you found in neighborhoods around the city? I mean, we've heard data a few minutes ago talking about the deregulation of units, mostly in Manhattan, but really in all 4 boroughs.
Yeah,
What
so
kind of data did you find?
again, because we don't have the HVS and we haven't had any luck with getting unit level data from the state, we actually didn't publish any numbers about the number of deregulated units by community district this year, because the most recent data we have is from 2011, and that, just as a New Yorker, that feels so unsatisfying. Yeah.
We had requested in our memo, the 2015 Income and Affordability Study follow-up memo number 2. We did get by borough and by community district 2014 HVS data run by HPD, median household income, median contract rent, and median gross rent for stabilized apartments. So that stuff is all there. We didn't ask for the number of units, but those are all at the subborough levels. Page 3 of that memo,
Pages 2 and 3 of the
which we can give you a copy of.
Could you highlight, were there any boroughs or any community districts from the last HVS that you saw, that had a great loss of rent stabilized units, and what kind of people live in those communities?
So we found, I think much of what Brian was discussing as I walked in, which was that the greatest loss was in Manhattan below 96th Street. But that, of course, was, now we're looking 4 years ago. So I think the trends may have changed in the meantime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great information presented in different ways, and